March 1967. The ancient Ram Inn, Watton-under-Edge, Gloucestershire. In the quiet, winding village of Watton-under-Edge, the ancient Ram Inn stood as a haunting testament to centuries of history. Nestled at the corner of a cobbled street, this crooked, centuries-old inn had long been a place of gossip and superstition. The locals spoke of strange happenings, whispers of ghostly apparitions, eerie noises in the night, and the darkness that seemed to cling to its very walls. But to Simon and Helen Richardson, a young couple newly arrived in Gloucestershire, it was simply an old, run-down bed and breakfast in need of some TLC. They'd moved to the area from London, hoping for a peaceful retreat after Simon's stressful years as a stockbroker. The couple had recently bought the inn, eager to restore it to its former glory and turn it into a thriving business, but neither of them could have foreseen the horrors they would soon encounter. The inn had had a long history, dating back to the 12th century. It was built on what was once an ancient pagan site, and before it became an inn, the building had served as a home for various clergy. Local folklore was thick with rumours about the land it sat on, tales of pagan rituals, sacrifices, and the tragic deaths of those who had lived or worked there. In fact, the village was known for its deep connection to dark legends, particularly surrounding the old inn. Simon, practical and skeptical, scoffed at the idea of ghost stories, dismissing them as mere local colour, but his wife Helen felt differently. Though she hadn't mentioned it, she had heard the rumours of the inn's darker past and felt uneasy about living there. Still, she was determined to make a fresh start and transform the old building into something beautiful. On their first night in the house, after a long day of cleaning and unpacking, Helen decided to retire early while Simon stayed up to organise some paperwork in the parlour. The air in the inn was thick with age, the wooden beams creaking under the weight of centuries, but it wasn't the house settling that unsettled Helen as she laid in bed. It was the feeling that something was watching her. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was nothing more than the house's odd layout, the strange acoustics. But as she drifted off to sleep, she heard it, a whisper, faint but undeniable, drifting through the still air. It came from downstairs, from the old stone fireplace in the parlour. At first she thought it was Simon, but then she remembered that he had been sitting in the study. The voice was softer, almost mocking. It whispered her name. Helen. Her heart raced and she shot up in bed, straining to listen. There was a long pause before the whisper returned, only this time it was clearer and closer. Come to me, Helen. Terrified, she rushed to the hallway, her breath catching in her throat. She stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at the darkened lower floor, half expecting someone to appear from the shadows. But there was nothing. No sign of life except the flickering candlelight that cast strange shadows against the stone walls. For a moment, Helen hesitated. Should she wake Simon? But as she turned to retreat to her room, the whispering returned, louder this time, more insistent. It came from below, from the direction of the parlour, but it wasn't just a whisper now. It was a low, raspy voice, almost as if it was breathing its words into her ear. Her pulse raced as she hurried back to their room, locking the door behind her. But sleep did not come. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind outside seemed to carry the whispers with it. She should feel a cold presence at the edge of her mind, waiting for her to acknowledge it. The next day, Helen told Simon about the strange voices. He listened patiently, but as expected, he dismissed her concerns with a reassuring smile. It's just the house, he said. These old places have odd acoustics. It's probably just the wind or the pipes acting up. But the whispers did not stop. Over the following weeks, the couple noticed strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, footsteps echoing in empty rooms, and the feeling of being watched, especially when they were alone. It was in the evenings, when the sun set and the shadows grew longer, that the house seemed to come alive with a strange energy. One evening, After Simon had gone to bed early, Helen decided to stay up and read in the parlour, hoping to pass the time until sleep claimed her. As she sat in the front of the fireplace, the room grew colder. Despite the fire crackling merrily in the hearth, she wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the hairs the back of her neck stand up. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw something. A shadow. No, not a shadow, it was a figure, a woman standing in the doorway. She was tall, her form indistinct but unmistakably human, draped in a dark cloak. Helen gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. The figure didn't move, but Helen could feel its presence, heavy and oppressive. The longer she stared, the more she began to make out the details. The woman's long tangled hair, her pale skin, and the unsettling emptiness in her eyes. Suddenly the figure began to move. Slowly it glided across the room, its feet not touching the floor, and then it stopped directly in front of Helen. She could hear a soft, raspy breathing, but there was no sound of the figure's footsteps. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and Helen's breath came in visible puffs. The woman's lips parted, and though she didn't speak, Helen could feel the words pressing into her mind. Leave this place. Leave now. Frozen, Helen could barely breathe, but she summoned the strength to speak. Who are you? The figure didn't answer, it only stared, its gaze unwavering. Then, as if it had never been there, it vanished, dissolving into the air like smoke. Terrified, Helen ran upstairs to Simon, shaking him awake. She told him everything, the figure, the coldness, the whispering. This time Simon was silent, his face pale as he listened. He had heard the rumours about the inn's past, but had refused to believe them. Now, with no explanation for what had just happened, he knew something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Simon went to the village to ask around the inn's history. The locals were more than willing to talk, but the stories that they told were far darker than he could have imagined. The inn had been built on a pagan burial ground, they said. In the 12th century, the land had been used for rituals, not all of them peaceful. Some villagers claimed that the inn had been a place for dark rites, while others said it was a sanctuary for those who had been cursed or shunned. But most unsettling were the stories about the women in the cloak, an ancient spirit that had once lived in the area. Some said she had been a witch, others said she had been a healer who had been accused of witchcraft and executed. And then there were those who spoke of a woman who had been sacrificed at the hands of a cult, her spirit doomed to linger in the inn, never finding peace. Simon and Helen didn't know how much of the local law was true, but they could feel the weight of the place pressing down on them. The inn had a history that stretched back far beyond their own lifetimes, and they realized that they were only visitors in a place where the past had never truly left. That night, they made the decision to leave. They packed their things in silence, each of them glancing warily over their shoulders as they moved through the rooms. The house seemed to watch them as they departed, and when they finally stepped outside, the weight in their chests seemed to lift, but only slightly. They never returned to the ancient Ram Inn, and it wasn't long before it changed hands once again. The inn continued to sit at the corner of the village, shrouded in mystery, its dark history only deepening with each passing year. To this day, the ancient Ram Inn is regarded as one of the most haunted places in England. Visitors who dare stay there speak of the same eerie presence that Simon and Helen encountered: cold spots, unsettling shadows, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. And though the inn has seen many owners come and go, some say that the spirit of the woman in the cloak still roams the halls, whispering her warning to anyone who dares to listen. Leave this place. Leave now.